Shalom. I'm Rabbi Nathan Davidovich, speaking to you on behalf of the webyeshiva.org, speaking to you from Efrat, Israel. I'm going to talk about the first sentence of this week's Torah reading, which in Israel is Bechukosai. The first sentence reads, Im Bechukosai telechu, if you will follow my laws, Bes mitzvosai tishmoru v'asisimosam, and do my commandments, and then it's followed by a list of the rewards that you'll get from following God's commandments. The operative word in this first sentence, I translate as if you follow, it says, Bechukosai telechu, means if you walk in my statutes and my laws. What does that mean? What does it mean to walk in God's commandments? What we're going to talk about today, this short Torah lesson, is how this teaches us how we can live our lives. I'm going to concentrate on the commentary written by the holy Ohr Hachaim, Rabbi Chaim Ben Atar, who lived first in Morocco and ended up in Israel. He died in the early 1800s, and he was a prolific commentator on the entire Torah. What is amazing, and it illustrates how we cannot expect to understand what the Torah is telling us by simply reading one sentence and thinking we understand it. On this one sentence that I just read to you, this first sentence of this Parsha, the Ohr Hachaim HaKodesh wrote 42 different explanations, different interpretations. And I'm going to talk about one of them. Let me tell you how he came to write so many interpretations on this one sentence. Just very briefly, I'll tell you the story as to what happened. In his town that he lived in, he would always, before Shabbat, slaughter an animal for use for meat on Shabbat. The rest of butchers in town would also, kill their animals and offer it to the people. This particular Friday, for some reason, all of the other meat in town was rendered not kosher. So the people couldn't eat it. So they all came to the Ohr Hachaim and they asked him to give them some meat so that they could celebrate Shabbos with meat. So he gave each one a portion. He was left with only one portion. And two people came to him wanting that last portion. One was a very wealthy person and one was a poor Torah scholar. And the wealthy person says, look, you got to give it to me. I'm a prominent person. What is this guy? He's just this poor scholar. He doesn't deserve it. And the Ohr Hachaim said, no, I'm going to give it to the Torah scholar. That night he had a dream. And he dreamed that he was going to have to go into exile because while he gave the food to the Torah scholar, he didn't stand up against the wealthy man and say, this is a great person because he's studying Torah. He went into exile, and he walked the entire week until he came to the next town. He stayed at somebody's house for Shabbat, and the person said, our rabbi gives a Torah lecture 3 times during Shabbat, Friday night lunch, and a Shalosh Seder's. Come and listen to him. So we went to listen to him, and Friday night the rabbi starts saying, I was told by an angel 14 different interpretations of this first sentence of this Torah. And it was written down by the holy Ohr Hachaim, the great righteous man. And Ohr Hachaim hears that and he says, what are you talking about? This is not a righteous man. He's just Chaim. People get very upset with him. Okay, next morning, the rabbi again is speaking. He said, I learned another 14 interpretations that an angel taught me that was written by the great, righteous, pious man, Rabbi Chaim Ben Atar, the Ohr Hachaim HaKadosh. And the Ohr Hachaim piped in. He says, no, this is not, he's not such a great person. He's just Chaim. And finally at Shalashidus, when again the rabbi came up with another 14, totaling 42, that he said were written by this great person, the Ohr Hachaim HaKadosh said, he's not such a great person. At this point, the rabbi was so upset, he ordered him to be locked up in this big closet that they had in the shul there. That night, the rabbi had a dream. An angel came to him and says, why did you lock up the holy Ohr Hachaim? And he said, oh my gosh, I didn't know. He went and opened the door and let him out, realize who he was. But what was his interpretation? One of the interpretations on this sentence that the Ohr Hachaim gave was I think it was the fourth interpretation of the 42. He said, we learn, King Solomon tells us in Proverbs, B'chol derechecha de'ehu, in every way, all of your ways you shall know God. And he quotes what the Rambam said, Maimonides said. He said, a person should make sure he has a perfect body in order to serve God properly. He says, because it's impossible to really understand Torah and God's objectives when you're suffering from hunger, thirst, or physical pain. And he says, when one follows this path, he is truly a servant of God. So he says, the meaning of the words, if you walk in the path of my statutes, he says, if your walking is designed to understand my laws, God's laws, then all your physical activities should be guided by the desire to better observe the commandments. Rabbi Avraham Tursky of blessed memory gives another interpretation of this. And he says, Rav Simcha Bunim of Shishka says that unlike angels who are created to be in the static state that they are, human beings are created to advance, to move. They can't remain static. I liken it to standing on a ladder, going up a ladder. If you're walking up, you're okay. But if you stand still, you're liable to fall. And Rabbi Tursky asks the question, he says, are we really truthful with ourselves? Have we progressed today spiritually over yesterday? You can't stand in one place. And he says it's not enough to simply observe the commandments, but we have to do it in a way that will enable us to progress spiritually. I haven't seen this particular answer anywhere, but I note that the fact that that the Ohr Hachaim gave 42 interpretations, maybe that has something to do with the fact that in the Torah, in the Parshas of Matos and Masai, there are listed 42 different places that the children of Israel traveled from the time they left Egypt until they reached Israel. And similarly, our sages tell us there are 42 different tests in our life that we have to overcome. And perhaps what the Ohr Hachaim is telling us, that to overcome these 42 tests in our life, we have to walk in God's ways, not leaving the confines of the spiritual ladder that we're in, but staying within that ladder, in Bechukosai telechu, walking in God's ways, so that everything you do is you're doing it for the will of God. You're not leaving your spirituality at home. You're not leaving it in the synagogue. You are bringing it with you every day, and understanding that you can't remain static. You got to be better today than you were yesterday. Thank you for listening on behalf of the webyeshiva.org. I wish everybody a wonderful Shabbat, and let's go higher and higher every single day of our lives. Shabbat Shalom.